At Rogue Farm Corps, we've been having day-long events called Changing Hands, where we bring together the elder generation, the younger generation, and we try and facilitate networking for folks between those two generations so that they can work on leases or partnerships themselves. We don't try and engineer it too much. We want it to be organic and something that they own, but oftentimes these people just aren't in the same room. With our Changing Hands events last year, we worked with 30 different organizations around the state to help us find presenters, to help us with outreach, to help us find venues, to do all sorts of things. So being a small staff where we're all part-time, we rely on our partners and their assistance in doing that outreach. It's all about the network. I think that there is space for someone who can facilitate connections and for an ombudsman who connects people not only to land or to tenants, but to the resources that can help them have a successful business. So the resources for financing or for business planning or for any of the other things that you're going to need to do to be successful. I don't think that web resource pages in and of themselves are going to be enough. For any generation, really. There's, if you don't use the internet, there's not enough information out there. If you use the internet, there's too much information out there. So how do you help curate that information and give people really what they need to look at so that they can be successful and not spin the wheels? Our overarching goal is to be able to pass on successful, viable farm businesses from this generation to the next, and at the same time preserve the agricultural land base and the natural resources that the agriculture depends upon. So how can we provide a safety net for that food system as a whole, which is a really complex thing, and that requires as many partners as there are out there.
But for many farmers, that farm is their sole retirement asset, and so it has to make financial sense. And so in many cases, there is a financial payment made for acquiring the easement. And that's typically done through an appraisal that looks at what are the rights that you're giving away and what is the value of those rights. And there's usually a cash payment made for that. The other financial benefit is a tax benefit. The reality is I think a lot of new farmers need that on-ramp to ownership. They can't come out of the gate and afford $10,000, $15,000 an acre. They need to be able to do a lease-to-own model or something like that. I neglected to mention, but there's increasingly a number of mission-driven capital folks that are also sort of playing in this space. They're not necessarily funding easements, but what they're doing is funding outright acquisitions, and they'll hold the property for a period of years, lease it, and then they'll eventually sell it to maybe a new farmer, a beginning farmer at a reduced rate, and they're funding that loss in value, so to speak, by selling an easement at the same time to, say, a soil and water district or a county agency. So I'd say if you have the vision, if you have the technical and the business acumen, I think you'll find that there are folks that are willing to work with you to try to figure out a way to make it work.
The succession with my dad's going really well. I think we turned a corner when I was getting a lot of flack for him because I wasn't able to come out and farm as much as I'd wanted to because I have a couple other jobs. And I finally told him, my other jobs pay me. I would be here more often if, but that is a factor of my decision making. And that actually sort of changed the dynamic. We had actually a reverse negotiation for my wages where he kept on wanting to push it up and I kept on saying minimum wage was fine, but it has changed how seriously we are taking the transition. My dad's really good about letting go the reins himself. In some ways, I hear that finances are always the last thing for someone to let go. My dad shows me all of the finances and we talk about them together, which is really great. And it probably is for the best. I'm not making major financial decisions right yet. But I think he wants to see the farm survive. And so for him, that means spending a lot of time with me, making sure I know what I'm doing. So I'm lucky to have that mentorship. A lot of people think of succession planning as like a will and a trust, but you do need years of time to actually learn how you're going to manage this business that you may or may not inherit. It's just essential.
This property that we're currently on was part of the RSC program, one of the founders, actually. So the caretaker's name was Tim Franklin, and he had been here for years. He did pasture management, so he had sheep, goats, and beef cows. And the 2 years when we were in Madison, Tim was killed in a car accident. And the owners of the ranch knew how important farm education was. And they put out into the community that they were looking for a new caretaker. And people knew that we were looking for land in Wisconsin, and our name was brought up. So the owners contacted us, and we talked to them and about everything. And we flew out in May to meet them and talk about the operation and what would happen. And then we made the move to come out here to keep the property in farming. We're making enough money to survive. The operation currently isn't profitable enough to take on the full mortgage of the property. We've been very lucky that the previous owners and now the current owners are very understanding of us and understanding of young farmers and how difficult it can be. So they are allowing us to take this time and build the operation up to the point where, you know, a financial agency would loan us the money to purchase the property. I was optimistic when we started because the previous landowners, we were all on board with us, but I'd say last year, the wife got ill, and it was no longer a good thing for them to hold on to the farm, so it was going to be sold. And we were not at the point where we could have afforded it at that moment. So we were thinking about what we'd have to do to relocate and where we were going to go. And we were looking at land prices all around the area. And the idea of moving the whole herd and the operation and starting over again after 3 years was the really daunting part that made us pessimistic. There was a moment when we thought, well, you know, what do we do now? I don't want to go back to waiting tables. And then I became optimistic when the new landowners approached us and asked if there was anything that they could do. And we were very honest about the operations and sent them our plans and our books. And they said, that's great, sounds wonderful. You guys should stay there. We like what you're doing. So we're here.
I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, we started talking about, well, the Via family and our family kind of wanted to be moving on at some point, and we knew that we really needed to be thinking about succession. Clearly, Chris and Shannon were in the position to do that, and it was kind of a question of their desire, whether they were ready to do that, whether they really wanted to. And so discussion just started up, what it would look like, what a transfer would look like. We didn't really know at the time, so we started thinking about structures, how that would take place, how much of the farm could they bite off.
And then in 2016, Shannon and I we split the farm into 2 different businesses. The livestock business, which is run by Jack, Wally, Jabrila, Mary Jo. And Shannon, they run the livestock business, and Shannon and I run the vegetable business. And you know, one of the challenges for young farmers is access to capital to buy land and equipment and that sort of thing. And being someone that was working on the farm, you're not saving a lot of money to be able to purchase land and equipment. So this made it more accessible for us to kind of go off and keep the farm going, and for them to step back and not have that burden of responsibility of a vegetable operation.
It was a good move for all of us. We were all about ready. We were at a little bit different stages of that, but we all were pretty ready. And by keeping the cows and the land for the Via family and the Gray Wade family, it's worked out well. A lot of farms, just started thinking, 2 or 3 years before they're thinking about retiring. And a lot of them really didn't have somebody already there who had been sort of brought up and somewhat groomed, you could say, in the position. And so all of a sudden they're in a position where they just are sort of groping for what to do next and how do we find somebody. And that's a real challenge when you're sort of turning over your baby, turning over your farm that you've developed over 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, some people. That's a real challenge all of a sudden to be doing that. And at the same time, the price of land is very expensive. And so the capability of people to being able to buy the land is difficult. So we have some people who are looking for someone who can step in on some sort of a joint venture kind of a thing like we have. Others are looking at just selling the farm, basically, lock, stock, and barrel, a going operation. So there's a whole wide variation of what people have. But it's a real challenge to start from scratch when you're ready to retire without having done a lot of prep work, I think.